The notice arrived on a Tuesday, folded inside a plain white envelope with no return address. Clara Mays almost didn't open it. She was sitting on the edge of a motel bed in Guthrie, Oklahoma, the kind of place where the carpet smelled like old cigarettes and the air conditioning rattled like a dying thing. She had $11 in her wallet, a duffel bag on the floor, and nowhere left to go. She had been driving west for 3 days after the bank took the house. Not her house. Not really. It had been Marcus's house, and Marcus had been gone for 2 years, and the bank didn't care much about the difference. They'd been polite about it. The men in their clean shirts. They always were. Polite in the way that people are when they've already decided something, and the deciding didn't cost them a thing. Clara was 34 years old. She had worked as a bookkeeper for a grain cooperative in Lawton until the cooperative folded. She had no children, no family to speak of, save for an aunt in Tulsa, who sent Christmas cards but never answered the phone. Her hands were the kind of hands that had known work, rough at the knuckles, steady, capable. But capable hands don't pay motel bills. She opened the envelope because she had nothing else to do. The letter was from an attorney's office in a town called Millhaven, Kansas. The paper was thick and formal, the language stiff as starched cotton. It informed her that one Edna Ruth Calloway, a great-aunt Clara had never once heard mentioned, had passed away at the age of 91 and had left behind a single property, a farmhouse, located approximately 4 miles east of Millhaven, along County Road 7. Clara read the letter twice, then a third time. The attorney's name was Harold Pruitt. He had written in careful, measured words that the property had been vacant for approximately 50 years, that it sat on 12 acres of land, that the taxes were 3 years in arrears. That Clara was, as far as the estate could determine, the sole surviving heir. She looked up from the paper, through the thin motel curtain. The Oklahoma sky was burning orange at the edges, the sun going down hard over flat land. A truck rolled by on the highway, its engine loud, and then gone. 12 acres. A house. 50 years empty. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she did neither. She sat very still, the letter in her hands, and listened to the rattle of the air conditioner and the distant sound of the highway, and she thought about a great-aunt she'd never known, and a house she'd never seen, abandoned somewhere out on the Kansas plains like a secret that no one had bothered to keep. By morning, she had pointed her car north. She didn't know what she would find there, but $11 and an empty road have a way of making a person brave. Before continuing, comment below where you are watching from. The drive to Millhaven took most of the morning. Kansas opened up around her slowly, the way it always does, like the land itself was exhaling, releasing the hills and the trees of the south until there was nothing left but sky and field and the occasional grain elevator rising silver against the blue. Clara had driven through Kansas before, but never stopped. It had always seemed like a place you passed through on the way to somewhere else. Now she wondered if she had always been wrong about that. She reached Millhaven just past 11. It was the kind of town that looked like it had been built with great ambition and then quietly left behind. A main street with a hardware store, a diner, a feed supply, a post office the size of a garden shed, a Baptist church with a marquee sign out front that read, "Here restores what the locusts have eaten." Clara slowed the car when she passed it, read it again, drove on. Harold Pruitt's office was above the hardware store, reached by a narrow staircase that smelled of linseed oil and dust. The attorney himself was a small, careful man in his late 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the unhurried manner of someone who had spent his whole life in a place where hurrying rarely helped. He shook her hand, offered her coffee, spread the documents across his desk with the patience of a man laying out a jigsaw puzzle he'd seen many times before. "The property belonged to your great-aunt Edna," he said. "She inherited it herself back in 1962 from her father, your great-great-grandfather, Hale Calloway. Edna never lived there. She moved to Wichita when she was young, never came back, but she never sold it either. Paid the taxes faithfully every year until about 2021. when her health declined. He paused. She was particular about that land. Particular in the way old people sometimes are about things they can't entirely explain. Clara looked at the papers. Why did she leave it to me? She didn't know me. Pruitt removed his glasses, cleaned them with the corner of his shirt. She knew of you. Your mother wrote to her years ago. Letters. He opened a desk drawer and slid a small bundle across to her, tied with kitchen twine. Edna kept them. All of them. Clara stared at the bundle. Her mother had been dead for 11 years. I didn't know they were in contact, she said. Most families have more going on beneath the surface than anyone realizes, Pruitt said, not unkindly. He gave her a key. Old iron. Heavy. The kind that felt like it carried the weight of every door that ever locked. He gave her a hand-drawn map, because County Road 7 didn't appear correctly on any phone's navigation. He told her the electricity had been disconnected for decades, that the well might still work or might not, that the structure had not been inspected. I want to be honest with you, Ms. Mays, he said, as she stood to leave. I've driven past that property. I haven't been inside. But from the road, he stopped, chose his words. It's been a long time since anyone cared for it. Clara nodded. She tucked the key into her jacket pocket. She could feel it there, solid against her ribs, as she walked back down the narrow stairs and out into the Millhaven noon, where the wind was already kicking dust off the street in small, swirling columns. For miles east on County Road 7, she followed the map of the windows down, the hot Kansas wind filling the car, the land stretching out on both sides in great flat distances of dry grass and turned earth. Red-winged blackbirds sat on the fence posts and watched her pass. The road turned to gravel. Then the gravel thinned. Then there was only a dirt track between two rusted fence lines, and at the end of it, she stopped the car. She got out slowly, and she stood in the heat and the silence and looked at what 50 years of forgetting had done to a place. The house was still standing. That was the first thing she told herself, and she held on to it like it mattered, because it did. It was a 2-story farmhouse, white once, the paint now stripped by decades of Kansas wind until the wood beneath showed gray and silver, like old bone. The front porch sagged on one side, where a support post had rotted through and given up. The windows on the ground floor were intact, but filmed over with grime so thick they reflected the sky like clouded mirrors. A elm tree had grown up close against the east wall, its branches pressing against the second-story eaves, as if the tree had been trying, slowly, patiently, to reclaim the house of the earth. The yard, if you could still call it that, was chest-high with dry grass and thistle, and the skeletal remains of what might once have been a kitchen garden. A rusted hand pump stood near the side of the house, leaning at an angle. An old barn sat 30 yards back, its roof partially collapsed, one wall bowed outward like it had taken a long breath and never let it go. Clara walked the perimeter slowly, the dry grass crackling under her boots, grasshoppers launching themselves out her path in small panicked arcs. The hot wind moved through the thistle with a sound like distant whispering. She was cataloging damage the way you catalog a wound, not to despair over it, but to understand what you were working with. The foundation, from what she could see, was stone. Good. The chimney was still upright. The roof had lost some shingles on the north slope, but had not caved. The porch was bad, but porches could be rebuilt. The elm would need to come back from the east wall before it split the siding any further. She stood at the front door for a long moment before using the key. The lock was stiff. She worked it carefully, the way Pruitt had warned her she might need to, until something deep in the mechanism shifted and surrendered, and the door swung inward on hinges that cried out with 50 years of rust. The smell hit her first. Dust, thick and dry and ancient. Old wood, something faintly floral underneath. Dried lavender, maybe from a time so far back it had become almost a ghost of a smell. The darkness inside was a heavy, settled kind that comes not from the absence of light, but from the accumulation of time. She stepped in. The front room held a stone fireplace, a wooden floor warped but intact, and furniture draped in sheets so gray with dust they looked like figures that had simply stopped moving. A tall clock stood against the far wall, its hands frozen at 4:17. She didn't know if that was morning or afternoon, and something about not knowing felt important, though she couldn't say why. She moved through the rooms slowly. The kitchen held a cast-iron stove, a dry sink. Shelves where mason jars stood in rows, their contents long evaporated to dark residue. A calendar on the wall showed October 1974. A child's drawing was tacked beside it, a house and a sun, and two stick figures holding hands. The crayon colors faded to whispers. Clara stood in front of that drawing for a long time. Upstairs, she found 3 bedrooms. In the smallest one, a single bed frame with a bare mattress, a braided rug gone colorless with age, and on the windowsill, a small ceramic bluebird, painted careful and bright, somehow untouched by the decades around it. The only thing in the whole house that still held its color. She picked it up. It fit in her palm exactly. She carried it to the window and rubbed the grime away with her sleeve and looked out the land, 12 acres of it, running out flat and dry toward a tree line in the west, the afternoon sky above it going that deep, burning Kansas amber that looks like the whole world is on fire and somehow inexplicably beautiful. She set the bluebird back on the sill. She went back downstairs, sat on the dusty floor of the front room with her back against the cold fireplace, and opened the bundle of letters Pruitt had given her. Her mother's handwriting looked up at her from the first page. And Clara Mays, who had not cried when the bank took the house, who had not cried when she drove away from Lawton with everything she owned in a duffel bag, who had not cried once in 3 days of driving, put her face in her hands and wept. If you like stories from the countryside like this one, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. She slept in her car that first night, parked in the dirt track beside the house, because she wasn't ready to sleep inside and she wasn't ready to leave. The Kansas night came down fast and total. No street lights, no neighbor's porch light bleeding over a fence. Just the stars, more of them than she had seen in years, thrown across the black sky in great, careless handfuls. The cricket started up around 9 and didn't stop. Somewhere out in the dark, something moved through the dry grass, a fox, maybe, or a coyote, and then was gone. Clara lay in the reclined passenger seat with her mother's letters spread across her lap, reading by flashlight. There were 14 letters in the bundle, written over a span of 8 years, the earliest dated 1989, the last from 1997, for years before her mother got sick. They were written in a particular voice her mother had, when she was being careful and honest at the same time, the voice Clara remembered from hard conversations at the kitchen table. The letters told a story she had never known. Her mother had grown up hearing about the Callaway land, about how it had been good farmland once, before a series of bad droughts in the late 60s had broken the family's ability to work it, about how Edna had walked away from it not out of indifference but out of grief, because her husband had died there suddenly in the summer of 1974, and she could not make herself go back. Not the next year, not the year after. And then enough years had passed that going back felt like opening a wound that had finally, barely closed. Clara read that part twice. October 1974. The calendar in the kitchen. The clock stopped at 4:17. She understood now what kind of grief could make a person leave a calendar on a wall for 50 years. The letters also spoke of the land itself. Her mother had written, in one of the later ones, Edna says the soil there is still good underneath, Clara. She says her father always called it patient land, land that waits. I think about that sometimes when things are hard, about patient things. Clara folded that letter carefully and held it against her chest in the dark. In the morning she drove back into Millhaven. The diner was called Patsy's, and it smelled like bacon grease and coffee, and the particular warmth of a place that has fed people through hard winters for a long time. She ordered eggs and toast and used the last of her $11, and while she ate she listened to the town around her. 2 farmers at the counter talking about the dry spell, 4th dry spring in a row, one of them said, shaking his head into his coffee. A woman in a feed store jacket paying her bill and mentioning that the Hendersons were selling their east pasture. Couldn't hold on any longer. The waitress, a heavy-set woman named Darlene with kind eyes and orthopedic shoes, refilling cups without being asked and calling everyone honey without it sounding like anything but what it was. These were people Clara understood. She had grown up alongside people like this. People for whom the land was not a backdrop, but a living negotiation. Something you worked with and worried over, and loved in the complicated way you love something that can break your heart. She told Darlene she'd inherited the old Calloway place. Darlene set down the coffee pot. "Lord," she said quietly, "that old house out on 7. You know it? Honey, everybody in Millhaven knows that property." She paused, seemed to choose her next word with the care of someone navigating a field they know has soft spots. People have wondered about it for years. Who owned it? Why nobody ever came? She looked at Clara steadily. "You planning to stay?" Clara thought about $11, about a duffel bag, about patient land. "I don't have anywhere else to be," she said. Darlene studied her for a moment with the frank, unhurried appraisal of a woman who had seen plenty of people come through hard times and could generally tell which ones had a particular quality required to come through them well. Whatever she saw in Clara, she seemed to reach a quiet conclusion. She refilled the coffee cup, unprompted, free of charge. "You come back tomorrow morning," she said. "I want you to meet somebody. Comment below if you would have the courage to do what she did." The somebody turned out to be a man named Walt Briggs. He was 67 years old, wide through the shoulders, with hands that looked like they had been carved from the same hardwood as the county's fence posts. He had farmed the land adjacent to the Calloway property for 31 years, the 300 acres to the north, running his operation alone since his wife passed and his son moved to Denver. He came into Patsy's at 7 in the morning the way Clara suspected. He came in every morning, hung his hat on the same peg by the door, and sat at the same stool at the end of the counter. Darlene introduced them, without ceremony. Walt looked at Clara the way farmers look at weather, measuring, patient, reserving judgment. "Calloway Place," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." He drank his coffee. "Roof still on?" "Mostly. Well's probably good. It's a deep well, hand-dug back in the 20s. That kind doesn't give up easy." He turned his cup in his hands. Foundations limestone. Those old-timers knew what they were doing with limestone. Clara felt something loosen slightly in her chest. "I don't have money for contractors," she said. She believed in being plain about hard things. Walt nodded slowly, unsurprised. "Most people who end up on that road don't." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've got a tractor with a brush hog attachment sitting idle. That yard needs clearing before you can do anything else. Ground's dry enough, won't take long." He said it the way men of his generation offered help. Not as generosity exactly, but as practical sense, as the obvious next step, as what neighbors simply did. "I can't pay you," Clara said. "Didn't ask you to." He came the next morning with the tractor and spent 4 hours reducing the chest-high tangle of the yard to stubble. Clara worked alongside him on foot with a brush hook she found rusted in the barn, clearing the area around the porch and the foundation, and by afternoon the house stood revealed in a way it hadn't in decades. Austere, weathered, diminished, but visible, present, like something that had been holding its breath and had finally been given permission to breathe. Other things revealed themselves, too. A stone path from the front porch to the road, mostly buried under years of dirt and growth, its flat limestone slab still solid underfoot. A hand-laid rock border around what had been a substantial kitchen garden on the south side of the house, the soil within it dark and different from the pale. Cracked earth around it, richer, somehow preserved by the years of decomposed vegetation above it. And at the back corner of the property, half hidden by a collapsed section of wooden fence, a small orchard. 6 apple trees, unpruned and wild-grown, their branches a dense tangle, but alive. Every one of them alive, with the small, hard buds of early spring just beginning to show at the branch tips. Walt cut the tractor engine and walked over to stand beside her in front of those trees. Hadn't seen those in years, he said quietly. Edna's father planted those. 60, 70 years ago, maybe. He reached out and touched one of the budding branches with a rough finger, gently, the way you touch something you're not sure is real. Oh, variety. Arkansas black, I think. Hard apple. Keeps all winter. Clara looked at the 6 trees, at the dark soil of the garden bed, at the limestone path running toward the road. Patient land. Her mother had written, land that waits. She had been here 3 days. She had no money, no electricity, no running water yet, no certainty of any kind. She was sleeping in the house now, on a camp mat she bought at the Millhaven hardware store by trading the only piece of jewelry she owned, a small gold bracelet. Nothing valuable, because Ray at the hardware counter had a daughter who liked jewelry and had offered a straight trade without making her feel small about it. The town was watching her. She could feel it, not with hostility, not exactly, but with the careful, measuring attention of a community that had been disappointed before and had learned to wait and see. There was a woman named Sheila Greer who drove past on County Road 7 3 days running and slowed each time, but never stopped. There was a conversation Clara overheard at the post office. 2 voices going quiet when she walked in, then resuming at a lower register. There was a moment at the feed supply when she asked about the cost of basic lumber, and the man behind the counter told her a price, and then watched her face when she heard it and didn't look away fast enough to hide that he was watching. Small wounds, the kind that don't bleed but accumulate. She was clearing the second upstairs bedroom that evening, carrying armloads of debris out to a burn pile in the yard. When she found the box, it was wooden, the size of a shoebox, tucked up into the back corner of the closet shelf, wrapped in an old flour sack. She almost missed it in the fading light. She carried it downstairs and set on the kitchen table and stood over for a moment in the amber dusk coming through the west window. Her name was on it, not Clara Mays. Her full name, her middle name included, written in an old woman's careful hand on a piece of folded paper tucked under the flour sack string. For Clara Ruth Mays, when she comes. Lee would like to help this story reach more people. She opened the box slowly. The way you open something when you understand that what's inside it would divide your life into before and after. Inside, nested in a folded piece of faded quilting cloth, were 4 things: a photograph, a deed, a letter, and a small iron key, different from the one Prue had given her. Smaller, older, with a scroll bow and a long, thin barrel. She picked up the photograph first. It showed 2 women standing in front of this house, in a time when the house was white, and the porch was straight, and the elm tree was only waist high. One woman was older, perhaps 60, with a broad face and steady eyes. The other was young, early 20s, dark-haired, laughing at something outside the frame with the unguarded joy of someone who doesn't know yet that joy is something to be careful with. On the back, in the same careful hand, Edna and Ruth, summer 1965. Ruth, her mother's name. Clara set the photograph down very carefully on the kitchen table. Her hands were not entirely steady. The letter was 4 pages, written close and deliberate, the handwriting of a woman who had thought a long time about every word. Dear Clara Ruth, it began. I never met you in this life, but I know you better than you might think. Your mother wrote to me about you for 8 years, and a mother who loves her daughter the way Ruth loved you writes the whole of that daughter into every line. I know you are stubborn in a good way. I know you do not ask for help easily. I know you have your mother's hands and your great-great-grandfather Hale's way of going quiet when something matters to you deeply. I am leaving you this land because it deserves someone who will stay, not someone who will sell it or develop it or look at those 12 acres and see only what they're worth in dollars. I tried to go back many times. I could not. The grief was too large and I was too small for it. And by the time I was large enough, I had made another life and the leaving had become its own kind of staying. But the land waited. Patient land. Your mother called it, because I told her that's what my father called it. He was right. Some land holds its goodness underground, like a promise it intends to keep. What I am telling you now, Clara, is this: the land is not broken. It is resting. The south garden soil is deep and dark because my father composted it for 30 years, and the years since I've only added to it. The well is good water. Have it tested, but it is good. The apple trees need pruning, but they are old stock and they will bear again. The house needs work, but it is honest work, the kind that teaches you something about yourself while you do it. Under the loose hearthstone, the one on the left side of the fireplace, you will know it because it sits slightly higher than the others. There is a strong box. The small key opens it. I will not tell you what is inside because I want you to find the way I want you to find everything on this land, by your own hands, in your own time, when you are ready. One more thing. The people of Millhaven are good people who have been let down enough times that they have learned caution. Do not be discouraged by their watching. They are not watching to see you fail. They are watching to see if you are real. Show them you are real, and they will show you who they are, and who they are is worth knowing. I am sorry I never called. I am sorry I was a stranger to you. I hope this land makes up for some of that, in the long way that land makes up for things. Slowly, seasonally, one harvest at a time. With love from your family, Edna Ruth Calloway. Clara sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she finished reading. Outside, the Kansas dust was doing what Kansas dust does, transforming the flat land into something almost unbearably beautiful. The sky running from deep blue at the zenith down through purple and rose, and that final burning amber at the horizon, the dry grass catching the last light and holding it gold. The crickets had begun. Somewhere in the old orchard, a bird was singing a simple, repeating song, unhurried, as if it had all the time in the world. She went to the fireplace. She found the hearthstone, left side, sitting just slightly proud of the others, exactly as Edna had said. She worked it loose with the flat of her hand, then both hands, the old mortar crumbling at the edges until the stone lifted free and set aside. The strong box was there, dark iron, hinge about the size of a large book. The small key fit. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to keep the damp away across all those decades, were documents, land surveys, the original deed to 12 acres, paid free and clear in 1931 by Hale Calloway, mineral rights documentation, and beneath those, a savings passbook from a Wichita bank, and a folded note in Edna's hand that said only, "Transferred to your name upon my death." Harold Pruitt has the account information. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to begin. Clara stared at the passbook. She thought about $11 in a Guthrie motel, about a car pointed north because there was nowhere else to go, about patient land and stop clocks and a ceramic bluebird that had kept its color through 50 years of forgetting. She pressed the oilcloth to her chest and looked up at the ceiling of the old kitchen, the water-stained plaster, the bare bulb fixture with no bulb, the cobwebs in the corners, and she laughed. Not the laugh of someone who has been given something. The laugh of someone who has finally understood something. Something her mother had known and written in careful letters to an old woman in Wichita across 8 years of ordinary Tuesdays. That family is not always the people who raised you. Sometimes it is the people who prepared a place for you before you were old enough to need it. Spring came to Millhaven the way it always does on the plains. Tentatively at first, the cold still sharp in the mornings, the wind still carrying its bite, and then all at once, like a decision finally made. Clara had the well tested. Walt had been right. Good water, deep and cold and clean. She hired Ray's teenage son to help her repair the porch for $30 and 2 meals at Patsy's, and the boy turned out to have a natural instinct for woodwork that neither of them had expected. She pruned the apple trees with guidance from an extension office pamphlet and from Walt, who came over on a Saturday morning and showed her how to make the cuts properly at the right angle so the wounds would heal clean. She broke ground on the south garden in late April. The soil was everything Edna had promised, dark and yielding, almost grateful under the tiller, releasing a smell of such raw, living earthiness that Clara stopped the first time she turned a row and just stood there breathing it in. Darlene spread the word at Patsy's. The way Darlene spread most things, which was efficiently and without cruelty. The woman out on the Callaway place was staying, was working the land, had fixed the porch and cleaned the windows and planted a proper kitchen garden, and had been seen at the feed supply buying seed like someone who intended to harvest something. Sheila Greer finally stopped her car one morning in late May. She stood at the edge of the stone path and called out, not coming closer until invited, in the way of people who have been raised to respect property lines in the deepest sense. She had a casserole dish covered in foil. She said she'd made extra and thought Clara might be too busy to cook and that it would keep 2 days in a cool place, and she hoped that was all right. It was more than all right. Over the casserole dish and 2 cups of coffee on the repaired porch, Clara learned that Sheila had grown up 2 miles east, that her grandmother had known Edna's father, that she had driven past the Callaway place for 30 years telling herself someone ought to do something about it. "I'm glad it was you," Sheila said, looking out at the turned garden, the pruned orchard, the house with its clean windows catching the afternoon light. I mean that. By the end of that first summer, the garden had produced more than Clara could eat alone. She sold the surplus at the Millhaven Farmers Market. A folding table, a handwritten sign, mason jars of preserves she put up in Edna's kitchen with a canning kit from the hardware store. The apple trees bore fruit in September for the first time in years, small and hard and deeply red. Arkansas black, just as Walt had said, with a flavor so complex and wild it made people stop mid-bite. She replanted the hearthstone. She wound the tall clock and set its hands and listened to it begin to tick again in the front room, a sound so ordinary and so enormous that she had to sit down when she heard it. She was not rich. She was not finished. There were still hard winters ahead and dry springs and particular loneliness of a life built slowly in a quiet place. There would be setbacks and doubts and mornings when the work felt larger than she was. But the house was warm. The land was hers. The bluebird sat on the windowsill where she had found it, still holding its color in the morning light. And Clara Mays, who had arrived at the end of the dirt road with nothing but $11 and a key and a bundle of her mother's letters, understood at last what patient things know that restless things do not, that beginnings do not announce themselves with trumpets. They arrive quietly, like a seed in dark soil, like a clock beginning to tick, like a woman standing in a doorway. She is finally, after everything, the right to call her own. Before you go, comment below where you are watching from and tell us, what would you have done with that key? If stories like this one move you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are more waiting.